Of course, just as I start recording, a fly comes right in here. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Let's just jump straight into this. Moving abroad for love. Bad idea, good idea. Should you do it or shouldn't you do it? It's something that over the years on Not Your Average Globetrotter, I have kind of urged people to really think about and to kind of maybe try and steer slightly away from. And the reason being is that, of course, moving abroad places a lot of pressure onto an individual. And if you saw the episode that I recorded with Josh and Kaylee from Expats Everywhere, something that came up was about how living abroad can make or break a relationship, very much so. And of course, when you're in a relationship, the backdrop definitely plays as part of the context of what that relationship functions within. But at the same time, I won't say that you shouldn't move abroad for love. I would say also it depends on some factors. If you are moving to another person's country and getting a visa and getting married solely for the purpose of being able to stay together, but you're not quite sure if you really want to be with that person or not, getting married for that visa is probably not a good idea. Or if you're already living in the same country together and getting married just for a visa, again, is something that I would say is probably not the best idea. I'll admit I don't have firsthand experience with that personally. However, I have seen it in front of me many times with people who I know, how that can be another factor that even I've seen horrible situations where one person held it over the other's head that, hey, they're in that country because of that person. They have no reason to be there otherwise. Or even the other way around, hey, that you brought this person to this country, so now you are responsible for them so they can kind of get away with whatever they want and you're on the hook for it. I mean, some countries like the US, you have a fiscal responsibility if you bring someone there. So while I thankfully don't have experience with that in particular about a person relying on another person for a visa in a relationship, I can say after almost 15 years abroad now that I've learned a thing or two along the way. And I would say it's really worthwhile if you are thinking about moving to another country with someone else, or if one person is going to be reliant on the other for a visa so that they have some way of family reunification or a spousal visa or whatever it may be. It might not be the best idea to do that really early on in the relationship, if possible. Of course, there are going to be situations where, yeah, that maybe you have to do something, but it's not an uncommon story where those marriages where they have to get married, quote unquote, don't end up working out long term. But of course, there are some that do. But the point that I'm really trying to get at here is that my recommendation would be, if you are in a relationship, hopefully you're in a relationship that has already had time to age like fine wine and not like pickle juice. And of course, while on the topic of love and visas and so on, of course, you have to talk about the topic of passport hunters. I'm not going to say that everybody who is out there is looking for a passport or is trying to get to another visa or this or that. But what I'm saying is you have to be careful because these people exist out there. Unfortunately, I have had situations where the person was more interested in the visa that they thought that I could help them get than me. It's not a fun thing to go through. And unfortunately, it wasn't a singular instance as well. Even very clearly, I remember one time, I don't know if I've talked about this on Not Your Average Globetrotter, but I specifically said to one woman that early on, because I was getting the feeling that she was kind of really interested in moving to the US. And I know she had been there for a part of high school, but she was interested in returning. And at that point, I made it quite clear that I had no intentions on moving back to the US. And not for any particular reasons. It's just the world is a big place and there's plenty more to explore, that I was happy where I was at the time. And when I told her about this, she became a lot less enthusiastic about moving forward. And unfortunately, again, it's not the only time that that's happened to me, but I remember very, very clearly we were making dinner. It was a big soup and everything seemed like it was great. And then all of a sudden, okay. Things went on a few weeks after that, but it was definitely the point where things started fizzling out. And unfortunately, that's one of just a few stories that I have to tell on that, but that's going to be the only one for this episode. So I'm not going to say that everybody will want to, because I have dated women who were totally not interested in that at all. So also, you have to consider what it is that you have going on in your life. Where are you? What is your job situation looking like? do you have ownership of a house? Do you have certain benefits that you get, that you receive from whatever it is that you have going on where you are for whatever reason? Family. That's another huge one. Are you willing to give that up? And yes, okay, if you are at that point where you are building a family together or you're building a life with someone, then okay, that's something to be said for that. And of course, you don't have to stay in the same place your whole life. However, if you find that you're getting to the point in your life where you do ever want to have children, grandparents are definitely something that you will start thinking about, and your child's access to knowing your parents. Because moving abroad for love is not just about, oh, we're so in love, this is so amazing, this is going to be fantastic. Moving abroad in general, of course, is a very serious topic. But moving abroad for love, of course, allows for a person's judgment to be clouded more easily. I would say, this is my opinion. Of course, not your average globetrotter. This is all my opinion here. And people are more than welcome to disagree with me. And if you do, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. These are just some of my opinions based on what I've experienced and observed over the years. But of course, if you are with someone from another country, are you willing to travel to that country? Are you willing to have a connection with that country? That's just within your level of preferences and what is okay for you. You have to understand and be very in tune with what works for you, what doesn't work for you, why does it work for you, why doesn't it work for you. Of course, a relationship to begin with, just like moving abroad, has its own sets of complexities, interpersonal relationship, literally relationship, very, very literally a thing that you're building up. And of course, if you're attaching a relocation to another area, and this can even happen domestically. If you're attaching a relocation to another area and something were to happen to that relationship, that's something to consider, that it could be a possibility. And if you are reliant on that person and being married to that person for that, or even if you're not married to that person, even some countries do allow for civil partnerships and for you to remain in that place. But if that relationship finishes, your visa may as well. But of course, this depends on what part of the world that you're in. So you have to be very, very sure that this is going to be, if not forever, very long term, or that you are willing to accept everything that comes along with it. But of course, in a relationship and thinking about moving abroad for life, oh, I'm willing to go through everything to make sure it's going to be perfect. That's great. That's cute. That's adorable. Think about it realistically. Think about the things that you go through on a day-to-day basis, and think about doing that in another place. Anything that you are experiencing now, any stresses in your relationship could be magnified. And of course, maybe they won't be magnified, but I am saying these as things to consider, because even for me, I'll admit, I am not fully for and I'm not fully against. I think it very much, of course, depends on your particular set of circumstances. And at this point in my life, I'm not interested in moving abroad again. I've moved abroad enough times in my life, and I've moved around most of my life many, many times. And so I'm not looking for that. So if I were to get into a relationship with a woman at this point in my life, if she's not here, that would be something that could be a make or break. Your ability to remain within the same area. It doesn't matter where on earth you are. These are things you have to take into consideration. But even with all of that said, the only reason at this point in my life that I might even remotely consider moving to another part of the world would be because of love. Me, the person who's talking about so much against it, saying that he would actually be in favor of doing it potentially himself. Yeah. Why? That would mean if I'm ready to move abroad with a woman that we're going to move to whatever country, maybe she's from a different country, and there has to be a really good reason for us to move there. The situation would really have to be very ideal between work, relationship. I mean, this would not just have to be a woman that I could imagine myself like really being happy with, but like forever. That's the only reason why I would ever consider that. And even if I met that woman who I would consider, okay, this woman is forever, I would still not necessarily want to move abroad. Like I said, I'm not looking for that at this point in my life. I've done it more than enough times. And so to put that extra stress on a relationship is not something that I'm looking for. However, I still would keep it within consideration. So for anybody out there who is seriously thinking about if they want to be doing this or not, I'm not saying do or don't do. What I'm saying is you need to weigh everything out realistically. Write it down on a piece of paper. Forget like a Word document. Forget like typing it into your phone. Go old fashioned. Put a piece of paper in front of you with a pen. Draw a line down the middle and draw lines across. Pros, cons. 1 pro, 1 con, 1 pro, 1 con, 2 pros, 3 cons, 5 pros. See where things weigh out, because that's going to be your final answer in the end. What are the things in the pros column versus the cons column, and how do they weigh each other out? Maybe you only have 1 con on your piece of paper, but maybe the weight of that con is enough to outweigh everything on the pros side. But you could have 1 pro that outweighs all the cons. These are all possibilities. And you just have to be able to look at these things realistically and making these decisions on your own. While I would say, yes, of course, you're going to be the one at the end of the day that has to do it, it's worthwhile talking to someone who you really can appreciate their opinion and who you have respect for, who is not just going to say what they think is best for them, and because maybe they are a family member of yours that wants to see you stay where you are, but maybe they are just a person that wants to see the best for you regardless. A decision like that is huge, especially if you've never lived abroad before. Moving abroad and being attached to someone, you are going to be living in a little bit of a bubble. Things are going to be a little bit more on easy mode for you than they would be for the average person moving to that country or to that city or to that whatever it is, because you will have already, like, you've gone through the pre-approval process. I've talked about this before, how when you are someone dating someone who's from that place, it's like, oh, okay, this person's all right. We can kind of welcome them in, at least to whatever extent. Not that it's always going to happen though. But if you move to a country on your own, you're in a little bit of a different category here. And so this is the thing. If the relationship were to not work out, how well equipped are you to be able to take care of things on your own in that place? Are they going to be talking and relating to all the paperwork and documents and this and that for you? Or are you going to be able to fend for yourself? Is it a country that you can move to where you have some ability to use the language already? These are all very, very important to take into consideration. Although, if you have lived abroad before, you will definitely understand what can be entailed with this type of decision. And it may be easier for you than a first timer. Getting straight off the boat is not easy regardless. I realize that I may sound quite negative in this episode, but I think it is important to remain grounded in reality and plan for not just the worst situation, but plan for the best situation. But sometimes the reality of things is that things can go further south than they might be able to go further north. Like, of course, in any relationship, you may get along with your significant other's family, but you may not. And when you are marrying someone, and of course, I'm more so talking about a marriage situation, because moving abroad without that type of commitment there, it's like, if you're not willing to have a major commitment, are you committed enough to making it really happen? I mean, I'm not going to judge too much here, because of course, some people do move abroad for kind of a girlfriend or a boyfriend, more of a earlier stage relationship, even pre-engagement. And of course, there are plenty of people who just don't plan on getting married legally regardless. So of course, if you're in that category, I think you'll get maybe what I'm getting at here is that you don't necessarily have to be married on paper. I'm not arguing for that. What I'm saying is that you have to be at that stage in life where it's kind of like, all right, we are us. I mean, if you're going to talk about polyamory and all of these other things, that's a whole different separate discussion, and the people who are committed to each other. So what I'm really talking about is, how committed are you to that person? How committed are they to you? But of course, there are so many factors that can go into this. It's impossible to say one thing is right or one thing is wrong for everybody, because it is going to be so dependent on the particular situation. So if you are somebody who is thinking about this and moving forward with moving abroad for love, I wish you all the best. Lots of luck, and that you only experience wonderful, great times with your special someone. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. And thank you all so much for the support for this project, like the monthly Patreon support, the one-time donations, and the thanks button down below here on YouTube. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you all next week for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.